I'm Kay, one of the creative directors at Superside. Please join me in welcoming two guests. We have Aletheia, who's a design and product ops manager at Zapier, and we have Francis, creative director at Mozilla. Thank you both for being here. I'm excited to have you. What a lovely group of people.
Awesome. Excited to be here. Excited to chat with you, Kay and Francis.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Always excited to have these sort of conversations. And to start us off, I would love to know how both of you would sum up your personal approach to AI in design. Alita, if you want to start.
Yeah. My approach to AI in design is very much like a really like bad spin-off of that saying. Like keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Not that, AI is an enemy, and that's why, the spin-off is kind of bad, but it's like an unknown, and it's like this super disruptive form of innovation and change at a massive, massive scale. And that can be like pretty scary for some people. But I feel like the thing that makes AI so wildly unknown and therefore like kind of scary for folks is also like the thing that excites me to keep super close to it. I want to flip the script a lot more. Like I know a lot of these AI products are still in their infancy, but I still see value in experimenting with them, getting more familiar with how the models work. How do I optimize prompting? So I guess like in a nutshell, my approach to AI is like very experimental and it's like motivated by wanting to stay close to the unknown. And I also find it's one of the best ways to like understand the limits of AI and discover then like where the next big opportunities are, both for the technology, but also for us as creatives.
Agreed. Francis, how about you?
Yeah, I think that was great. I think experimental is like a good way to sort of sum it up. I think on our end, on the creative side, it's like iterative. I think that's like a pretty accurate statement in that we're constantly testing, but we're also just like learning the boundaries. I think that's a good point that Athelia made. We don't get that much in the form of like a finished product, but it is very much like built into the workflow. And I think it's probably going to continue to have like a more sort of prominent presence in that space. But it does help with like certain tasks really well, especially when it's just like around automation. I'll touch upon that like a little bit later. But at this point, it's mostly like a process and kind of an efficiency tool. Especially like internally when there's like, I'm thinking like mood boards and mock-ups and that sort of thing. You can work really quickly. But it's mostly internal facing, and it might play a part in some part of the creative process, but it's really not meant to, at least in my experience, nothing that we've gotten like overly reliant on. It's just a sort of an efficiency tool, especially on the creative end.
Totally. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's interesting we're mentioning experimentation. Yesterday, we had Lauren from Sana who made this point of like, we don't want to go away from experimentation to exploitation of AI too soon. We want to stay in this experimentation phase. And I feel like for myself, although it's a bit scary to be like 15 years in your career and like be working on something completely new, it's quite exciting as well to be in this phase of like humanity, to be using something that's developing as you use it. So I find it quite interesting also to like get completely new ideas and approaches that we kind of haven't thought about before. And with that in mind, it brings me to my next question. Francis, have you noticed any like tangible benefits from using AI during this ideation phase of the creative process in the beginning? Do you have any specific examples?
Yeah, I put together a little workflow. I think that there's some wins that we've experienced and some challenges. I often talk with people that AI at times feels like kind of an overly excitable intern that uses like a ton of adjectives and exclamation points, especially like when you're looking at like sort of the copy side of things. But when I was thinking about like how to frame this talk, one, I was like, how can I get as much information on this page with the smallest text possible? So mission accomplished. But I was looking at like what might like a workflow look like in the most sort of complex end. So this isn't meant to sort of illustrate how someone might work from end to end, but like how you might audit a certain part of this process. Like you might start in like the research flow and then, you might use it up until the writing. But this is something that I sort of used in my head that that's been helpful and have used sort of parts of it, but this could be a sort of a potential workflow from like, let's say the research side of things all the way to like an output. One thing I think that it does really well is sort of the research phase of things. Like on the analytical side, I think that AI actually does a really good job of like telling you the way it wants to be prompted. So like using it to like load up specific types of information, especially around like imagery, like describe this image. It might help define a specific type of language that you can then input back in, or like break down this headline. So it can be like academic in that sense and help build up, your sort of prompting strength, but also like the type of language and even like some technical terms around like the imagery side of things, like cameras and lighting and that sort of stuff that can just like help you in your development process. So I'd say that like the analytical side of AI has been really helpful in the workflow, concept development. And I put a few tools down here, some that I've used with some success, but obviously not exhaustive, and everyone's got their own workflows. But like in concept development, like obviously like Midjourney, DALL-E, Firefly's done a good job. And then like all the integrations that I think that we've done has been great. But also like, it's difficult to get something that's just completely done and baked. Like you're going to be jumping out of a lot of different programs to do a lot of different things. That's why there's some of these areas where like when you're in concept development, we found that like you might get something really nice out of Midjourney, but then you've got to go into Photoshop, maybe use like a generative fill, or like some of their neural filters I think are pretty strong. You might need to upscale some things. So it's like, it's kind of got you bouncing around in a lot of different areas, but it can be really helpful. So you'll like define your own flow and see what tools work the best. There's a lot of tools coming out, and they're sort of happening, evolving at like such a rapid rate. But even writing, like there's, the sort of classics like Jasper and Copy AI, but even some other ones that are probably less, I don't know if folks know about Text Effects, which has been really good. It's sort of a, developed by Google, Nube Fiasco. That's been a real source of like inspiration. Even like getting into the GPTs themselves, like looking at user-generated GPTs, I think is really helpful. Just to see if you're looking for something kind of craft specific, using other tools to sort of like help with the sort of the refinement of that. Like I'm thinking Hemingway, Grammarly, that sort of stuff. There's like great tools for storyboarding, especially if you want to look at like animatics or just getting like a vision out very quickly. There's a few there, boards, and Storyboard Hero has been pretty helpful. There's a ton around sound. Same thing that happens on the sort of image side of things, that you can start to develop a language. You can mix different genres. You can get like a sound bed for a sound designer if you're going to use that. Like it just helps you speed up the process, or like help kind of refine the vision in a way that I think is really helpful. Same thing with VO. There's just like so many great VO options. 11 we found like a lot of success with, but like, is it young? Is it old? Is it male? Is it female? There's just like, you can answer those questions pretty early on before you go out to casting. And in video, I think that like there's a ton out there. I've had a friend of mine that's in the entertainment industry that's gotten her hands on Sora and said it's pretty incredible. So I think that's going to be a bit of a game changer. Not here yet, but even Pika and Runway have been great. And even following like the Runway Awards is just to see like how people are using it is like another sort of effective thing to do. Is just understanding like, what are people doing with it? How far can I push it? I did put a few AI newsletters and kind of like sort of influencers to follow down in the lower right hand corner, but like staying on top of it, staying on top of newsletters and folks who are posting on social has been a good way for us to sort of stay plugged in.
I love this cheat sheet. I'm sure that like thousands of people immediately at the same time took a screenshot of it and now reposting it. And it's true. I think what I find the most challenging is not like what AI can do, is thinking about things that it could help you with, because we're so stuck in like, yeah, I can write things in ChatGPT and generate images. Well, like you can do so much more. And I love this workflow you have. And I wanted to ask you, Aletheia, and I know we spoke about this before. I know you guys use a lot of AI at Zapier. Do you have any examples of how AI has helped the team approach challenges in new ways?
Yeah. Gosh, so many examples. I love like that cheat sheet that Francis you put up, and how you segmented like these are the different phases of the creative workflow, or like these different tasks, and these are the tools that you can experiment with, with these different phases. I just wanted to call out, I think that's so awesome. And yeah, I think for us, well, on my team, we have been experimenting with AI, both for creative outputs, but also to solve operational challenges, because like the team is ops driven. And I think like, so first on the creative side, last year, our brand studio team, they did like a deep dive with AI in art using mostly DALL-E and Midjourney. And so I have a slide here where you can see just like a few outputs from the team. So these are just like some experiments that they generated. And then in the next slide, like just a really zoomed out view of like how we were playing with the prompting, the models, like the parameters and like various commands. So we went like really deep in this tool. And I think like the whole idea was like, can we train AI to create art that feels authentically Zapier? What's like the secret recipe for what we would consider authentically Zapier? If we go from text to AI generated imagery, and is that repeatable? Is that consistent? Is that scalable? Is it inclusive or even desirable? And so on this next slide, you can see we had all these like interesting questions and like insights. So I think it's like on the next slide where it says like the results. Yeah, the AI and art experiment. There's like all these like different insights or questions that we came away with about like, what are these tools good at? What are they bad at? Who owns AI generated art? And where does it make sense to use AI right now in our brand? So I think to echo like a lot of what Francis was saying, like we found it was really helpful for like rapid concepting and just giving us optionality or like pushing our imagination a little bit more, but like still not there yet in terms of like a final product. So like not great at hands, not great at portraying people diversity, not great at associating narrative with imagery. So that's like an example of AI in our creative work. And on the ops side of things, like recently I've been really into building like a lot of custom AI products. Mostly because like Zapier, what's great is like you have access to all these like different tools that are coming out and you can build and experiment your own. And essentially I've been trying to make these tools that make it easier for people at work to find stuff. So a really recent example of this was like this simple onboarding bot that I built for our new designers to get to know their managers, like their personalities, their communication preferences, how they approach problems, etc. I think I have like this 1-minute demo where I just showed kind of like quickly the back end, how I built it. You can probably just play. I've been building out onboarding documentation for our new design and product hires here at Zapier, and I suggested to the managers that they include a kind of README just to give their new hires a better sense of their management style, their communication preferences, and just generally ways of working with them. So I took Melinda's README here and I just built it into a chatbot. So I uploaded it as a knowledge source with Zapier chatbots here, configured it, and gave the bot instructions on how it should behave. And then I styled it in interfaces here. So gave it some of its own like basic branding. And then I embedded this chatbot into Adam's onboarding documentation here. So now he can ask Melinda anything. And this will query the chatbot and the knowledge source of the README on the back end, so it knows how to respond.
This is awesome. And I remember I saw this before, Aletheia. You shared it with us in our funnels. I think it's so interesting. Like literally, it's just what we were talking about before. Like there's so many ways you can use this, and I think sometimes we're like not good at like getting these ideas up the ground and trying things out and having that mindset, like trying different things out with AI. I also wanted to ask you, Francis, in terms of like, let's pause on the big picture questions, but in terms of the next months, what is your team working on in terms of AI? And I assume that with the fact that you have this cheat sheet, you're kind of trying to build things, trying to build processes. Can you talk us through this a bit?
Yeah, sure. First, that was awesome. Yeah, we might have to talk about that later because that looked great. Yeah, I think again, I think it's to Athelia's earlier point, like it's really around experimentation. I think something cool that Mozilla just did was just greenlight ChatGPT for the entire org, so like everyone will have access to it. So I think we're going to see it integrated in a lot of different ways across the organization. But yeah, I see more integration like as we sort of move forward and think about what are the things that we can automate so we can have a little bit more time on the sort of creative side of things. I always feel like there's a gap in between like the sort of analytical side of things and the production. I think right in between those two things is where we still need a lot of human creativity, and I think that that's where a good designer is going to be really tough to beat. But speeding up the sort of front end and the back end, I think is something that we're continually experimenting with. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
Absolutely. And I think it's also changing so dramatically, like every month for me. I feel like we're at this place where, we're trying to build something and then everything changes and you have to kind of rethink your strategy. I don't know if this also happens to you, Alethea. Like, do you have any examples of stuff that like you were doing completely differently before and now in like 2 or 3 months everything changes and AI has
Yeah.
brought us.
Right. Yeah. I would say like there's things for like that ops drives that are like change management related. And I think, well, I guess like to back up, I feel like the like I think AI and automation. So I love that Francis like touched on automation too, because I feel like it's a very powerful combo, like to have the two. And I think that has brought a lot of like excitement and this like element of almost like of play to my design ops ethos. Like I'm like really excited, a lot more excited to like break things and like use AI to bend the way that we're so used to doing things. I guess as ops people who are like very into like structure and like process and I think it's like really interesting to use AI to like think about the problem a bit differently and to almost like stress test normality like if that makes sense and I think like as you both mentioned we're in this like experimental phase and I think that's like the best time to play is like when the tools and the models are still imperfect, like our approach is going to be imperfect, the outputs like are going to be a bit wonky, but like that's okay, that's like part of the process, and the learning. I put this quick diagram together to show some like real life concrete examples of like where our ops team has been breaking things and building things with AI at Zapier today. So yeah, like a lot of the things fall into, these are just like a handful of examples, but a lot of these things fall into the productivity and process category. But there's also like team culture and of course creative outputs. I think the biggest change for me when Kay, you were talking about like the before and after, it's been like getting to build more stuff and then drive the cultural, behavioral, like organizational change piece around these AI powered workflows. Like before, mostly I feel like it was managing change that was like led by people and teams. And now sometimes it's about driving change around a process where like you've removed the human, and that's like a very interesting shift to be experiencing, but also to be like influencing. And I think if I had to like boil it down, like using AI in design has had an impact on like three fundamental things. And I sort of just tried to summarize it. And I think there's like a slide with just like three quick pillars. I think like first, obviously AI impacts how we work. So what we talked about, like our workflow, our process, for us, like our design system documentation, how we track projects. And then like the second thing is like, it's causing us to fundamentally rethink what we design. There are like these, like we have some of these like very popular apps and websites today, and they're built around these core user flows that are like ubiquitous. And I think we're thinking like, how does integrating UI into the user journey change like the jobs to be done? If instead of making a manual selection, they can populate an entire screen full of decisions with AI generated data, like what user flows become obsolete. How do you represent AI or like graphically in a digital product, legally, ethically, and inclusively? So there's like, yeah, like the nature of like what we design is being like, I think we're like rethinking that. And then the third axis goes beyond just the work. It like touches on something deep, and that is like our identity, like who we are, who designs, what is a designer, like what is the level of craft that we are responsible for, what decisions do we own. So yeah, I think there's a lot to like reconsider with AI in design ops, but also like in design more broadly.
That's such an interesting point, and I really like how you're describing it, like as this conversation between the AI and the human. And because I think this is how the tools are built as well. They're not like this input field where you just tell it what to do and it just does it. It's all about like prompts are all about the conversation back and forth. And I think we're somehow so privileged as people who work in design and creative in the creative space that like we're already used to working like this. Everything is iterative. Everything goes around like rounds of feedback. So we are not the sort of people who just like, go and do something and that's it. It's all about the communication. So that's super interesting. And I think I think we in the last 2 days of the summit, a lot of the questions were around like how do we integrate AI in our creative process that's not like about taking meeting notes and doing like the production work for us, but it's all about that conversation. So I guess my last question for you guys before going into the Q&A is how do we integrate AI into these creative workflows without disrupting this like natural flow of human creativity, which probably we also don't know how it is exactly, and it's maybe different for everyone. So how do we make this happen? And if you want to start, Francis.
Oh yeah, sure. I think one, we can't become overly reliant on AI. Like it's not going to, we've touched on this a little bit, but it's not going to solve the problem outright. Like it's not going to be a simple prompt that spits out exactly what you need. So I think there's always going to be around like just staying on top of your craft and then like looking for ways to integrate it sort of seamlessly, but not thinking that it's going to just do the work. So I think that's sort of part of it. It might solve part of the solution, or it might be part of the process that leads to something or sparks a part of the creative process that leads you to it. But like, there's always that, like, I can't stress this enough, a good creative is always like super hard to find, and staying great at what you do is really helpful. I think it's just looking for ways to sort of speed up the things that don't need as much attention, so you can free up more time on the creative side. I countless hours looking for like the perfect image in a mood board. I'm like, okay, cool. I can actually like get that out pretty quickly. Or like a mock-up for an activation idea. Like you can get that with like a higher level of fidelity without having to like approximate it through a series of images. So I'm saying like that's great, but the idea still needs to, for the most part, sort of come from a really smart and clever human input. And that it obviously takes a team. So yeah, I mean, it also comes with, and we touched a little bit on this, like it comes with a lot of caveats. Like there are like legal compliance issues, there's IP issues, there's transparency with consumers, there's data privacy. So there's all those things. I'm thinking about the like Mission Impossible meme with like the lasers coming and trying to like work with like not only how to prompt correctly and get what you need, but also like how to make sure that if something does go out and market it, it's like it aligns with your values, and you're not going to have a lawyer knocking on your door at some point. So I think it's still new, and everyone's kind of learning together. It's very much like a test and learn era and phase of things. But my advice, or at least the thing that we'll be doing internally, is just constantly pushing the boundaries of where the tools are, what they can do, what's new, and then sort of building our own processes. Like you're going to be bouncing between a lot of different AI tools and using them in conjunction to sort of get to where you want. So it'll just be a sort of constant learning phase.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I love that. I think like Francis, you opened up like talking about this kind of like iterative like nature of how your approach to AI is and on your team. And I think that's like exactly, I feel like it's 100% like very interesting to play with that iterative experimental mindset. Both like for, I think like where the tools are at right now, you have to like, I tried to like create this like very simple icon the other day using GPT-4, which now has like DALI. And like, even though it's supposed to be like a simple thing, like to create this icon that I had an idea of, like I had to prompt it, like iterate on that prompt like many, many, many times. And in the end, I just ended up creating it myself in Figma. So there's like things where it's like, yeah, you just have to like play around with it, have to iteratively prompt it. But anyways, I think like, sorry, like I think when the like printing press or the smartphone came out, or like the internet, it probably disrupted how people were doing things and making stuff. And Noah Levin, who's like the, design exec at Figma, he wrote this like really interesting piece last year. He talks about how emergent tech and innovation have never replaced the need for thoughtful design. And I have this like super basic drawing on this slide. I don't even think I can call it a drawing, but but it like illustrates like this analogy that Noah uses to describe the potential of AI in design. So there's like design today, and it's like in the analogy, there's like the total space of design is contained within this like floor and ceiling, and the ceiling is like how good a designer can be at designing, which is like constrained by the available tooling, and the floor is like the minimum skill that's required for someone to participate in design. And I guess like the optimistic hypothesis is that AI will lift the ceiling, so lead to more ideally, like more ambitious creative outputs that are made possible by more powerful tools, but it will also lower the floor, so making it easier for anyone to design and visually collaborate. So like this is the optimistic view, but I'm like really excited to see the expansion of that shared design space, and how people sort of like co-share the responsibility in that space of like building product, building brand, building experience. And I think the point is like we live in this new paradigm now, with AI, and now we get to figure out how we adapt the way we're thinking and creating. How do we use AI to amplify human creativity? And I think there's a path to that, but it requires the models to be like better than they are today, and it requires us to like constantly iterate, experiment, and build with it.
I couldn't agree more. And another slide is going to go down in like the screenshot storm. But no, we were literally just talking about this the other day. I couldn't agree more. And we have a few minutes left, and I'd love to get to one question from the Q&A and then wrap it up. We have a question from Sydney. How do you bring your team on board with these AI enhancements when everyone has a different relationship with the tool that is AI? And I guess another kind of appetite for risk, and how do you deal with that in your team? Whoever wants to start.
Francis, I'll pass the hot potato to you.
I mean, I would say there wasn't a lot of convincing needed on our end. I think that there was a recognition that these were tools to sort of help in the creative process, not meant to replace. And that's been sort of evidenced through all of our experimentations. It's like there was no sort of single prompt that solved the problem. I mean, at some point, I'm also curious about like kind of a snake eating its own tail, right? Like the AI sort of scraping a lot of like the internet, that sort of fresh human ingenuity and creativity, but then does the sort of new AI generated stuff get fed back into the system? Again, why I'm constantly sort of stressing that like the need to stay in culture and on your craft. But from our end, it was like we were really excited to see how we could integrate it. It didn't take a ton of convincing. It was more on the sort of practical side of things, some of the stuff I mentioned earlier, like the sort of legal and IP risk and that sort of thing. But we didn't really look at it as a threat. We looked at it as a way to like sort of speed things up, enhance creativity, maybe surprise us in some ways, which it also has. So overall, sort of net positive, but still very much like early in the process.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting take. I feel like for us, it's been similar too, where I think it's like the threat level of the AI models isn't high enough for people to be like, oh, like there's like a lot of risk like associated with these tools replacing our creative humans. There are considerations around like ownership of the thing, ethical, moral things, but not, I think, in a sense that of fearing like AI would replace. So it's been like very fun, I think, for people to experiment with tools. And I think also probably the inherent like culture at Zapier is like very, very bullish on automation and AI. So it's almost like if you're not experimenting with AI, you're like missing out, like what are you doing? So I think that is part of also like the organizational culture, but it's very much been like embraced so far, the kind of like experimenting with it, playing with it, learning as you go. Yeah.
Totally. I know that there's been this like meme or post going around LinkedIn that says like designers are not going to be replaced by robots, but by other designers that know how to use AI. And I think that is true. Like in the future, it's like you said, Aletheia, like where are you going? If you're not using AI, what are you going to be doing? And I am sure that all these, notaries before the press would have said, "Oh, Gutenberg is coming to steal our jobs." But now we're here and we have tablets, so that's
Right.
just program.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, as usual, these sessions are too quick to pass too quickly, and we're at the end. Francis and Aletheia, like what a discussion! Thank you so much. This is always such a pleasure. I want to schedule a next a spin-off of this where we just talk more about it.
I hope you enjoyed that session from our virtual event, The Infinite Canvas, exploring AI's creative potential. There's plenty more to learn, so be sure to check out the rest of the sessions. Otherwise, head over to superside.com for more on AI and its impact on marketing and creative. Thanks for watching.